Something unusual happened recently, and your soulmate never saw it coming. A conversation took place behind the scenes, a conversation that had nothing to do with them at first, yet somehow your name became the center of it. What makes this situation so important is that the person speaking wasn't sharing neutral information. They were actively trying to shape the way your soulmate viewed you. They wanted to influence their opinion. They wanted to plant doubt where certainty once existed. And listen to this carefully. The strange part is that your soulmate had no reason to expect this. They weren't looking for negative information about you. They weren't questioning the connection. They weren't searching for reasons to pull away. Yet suddenly, they found themselves listening to words that challenged everything they thought they knew. At first, the conversation caught them off guard. The person speaking sounded convincing. They spoke with confidence. They presented their perspective as if it were undeniable truth. For a moment, your soulmate didn't know what to think. Questions immediately started forming inside their mind. Was there something they had missed? Was there a side of you they had never seen before? Had they misunderstood certain situations without realizing it? And your heart needs this right now, because doubt can be powerful when it arrives unexpectedly. Even the strongest beliefs can be shaken when someone presents a story with enough confidence. As the hours passed, those words lingered in their thoughts. They replayed the conversation again and again, trying to make sense of it. Part of them wondered if they should take the warning seriously. Part of them felt they would be foolish to ignore it completely. But another part of them kept resisting. Another part of them couldn't reconcile what they had heard with what they had personally experienced. And listen to this. That inner conflict became impossible to ignore. On one side was someone else's version of the truth. On the other side were their own memories, their own observations, and their own experiences with you. The more they thought about it, the more confused they became. The information sounded convincing, yet something felt off. Something didn't align. The story they were being told seemed different from the person they had come to know. Every time they tried to accept the negative picture being painted, a memory surfaced that contradicted it. Every time they considered believing the claims, another experience reminded them of a completely different reality. And your heart needs this right now, because what started as a simple conversation was quickly becoming something much bigger. The attempt to influence their opinion had succeeded in creating questions, but it had not succeeded in creating certainty. In fact, it was doing the opposite. Instead of blindly accepting what they heard, your soulmate felt compelled to look deeper. They felt compelled to find answers for themselves. And that decision would soon uncover truths that nobody involved expected them to discover. And listen to this carefully. Because the moment your soulmate decided to stop relying on what they had been told and start looking for answers themselves, everything began changing. The conversation that was supposed to influence them had left them with more questions than conclusions. They could not shake the feeling that something was missing. The story they heard sounded convincing on the surface, but the more they reflected on it, the more cracks they started noticing. And your heart needs this right now, because your soulmate was no longer interested in accepting someone else's version of the truth. They wanted to see the truth with their own eyes, instead of allowing the negative words to take control of their perspective. They started paying closer attention to their memories. They revisited past conversations. They replayed old interactions in their mind. They reflected on moments they had shared with you, moments that once seemed ordinary, but now carried new importance. And listen to this. What they discovered surprised them. The more they thought about their actual experiences, the less the accusations seemed to fit. The image being painted by someone else simply did not match the person they remembered. At first, they wondered if they were being biased. Maybe they were focusing only on the positive moments. Maybe they were ignoring certain details. So they looked deeper. They examined everything as honestly as they could. They questioned their own assumptions. They searched for evidence that would support the story they had been told. But every time they looked closer, they found themselves reaching the same conclusion. Reality felt very different from the narrative that had been presented to them. And listen to this. Small details began standing out. Things that seemed insignificant before suddenly became important. They remembered moments when your actions revealed your character. They remembered situations where you remained consistent even when nobody was watching. They remembered how you handled challenges, how you treated others, and how your words often matched your actions. These were not dramatic memories. They were simple observations. Yet those observations carried more weight than any rumor because they were real. The more they reflected, the more confused they became about the information they had received. If what they had been told was true, why did their own experiences point in the opposite direction? Why did every memory seem to challenge the accusations? Why did the story feel incomplete? And your heart needs this right now, because doubt was beginning to shift. At first, the doubt was directed toward you. Now the doubt was directed toward the information itself. As this process continued, your soulmate became increasingly aware of inconsistencies. Certain claims sounded strong during the conversation, but when compared to reality, they started falling apart. Some details seemed exaggerated. Some details seemed based on assumptions rather than facts. Some details ignored important parts of the story entirely. And listen to this. The more they examined everything, the more they realized that they were not looking at the full truth. They were looking at someone's interpretation of the truth. That realization changed everything. For the first time, they started asking a different question. Instead of asking whether the negative things they heard were accurate, they started asking why someone wanted them to believe those things in the first place. Why was this conversation happening? Why was there such a strong effort to influence their opinion? Why did it feel as though someone was trying to guide them toward a specific conclusion? And your heart needs this right now, because those questions opened a completely new door. Suddenly the focus was no longer on you. The focus was shifting toward the source of the information. The more they analyzed the situation, the more they sensed there was another layer beneath everything they had been told. A layer that had nothing to do with your actions, and everything to do with hidden motivations, misunderstandings, or personal perspectives. By the end of this period of reflection, your soulmate had reached an important realization. The story they were given and the reality they experienced were not the same thing. One was built on someone else's words. The other was built on personal observation. And when forced to choose between the two, They found themselves trusting what they had actually lived through, rather than what they had simply heard. That decision marked a turning point, because the deeper they looked into the situation, the more they began uncovering a truth that nobody had intended for them to see. And what they discovered next would completely change the way they understood everything that had happened. And listen to this carefully, because the deeper your soulmate looked into the situation, the more they realized that this was never really about you in the first place. At the beginning, they believed they were trying to figure out whether the things they heard were true. They thought the situation was about understanding your character. They thought the answers would be found by examining your actions. But as they continued reflecting, a different picture started emerging. A picture that shifted their attention away from you and toward the person who had been trying so hard to influence their opinion. The more they analyzed the conversation, the more certain details began standing out. They noticed how some facts had been emphasized, while others had been completely ignored. They noticed how certain situations had been presented from only one perspective. They noticed how the story seemed designed to create a specific emotional reaction, rather than provide balanced understanding. And your heart needs this right now, because your soulmate was beginning to recognize something important. When someone truly wants to help another person, they usually encourage understanding. But when someone wants to control a narrative, they often encourage judgment. At first, they didn't want to believe this realization. They wanted to assume good intentions. They wanted to believe that everyone involved was simply sharing honest concerns. But the more they reflected, the harder it became to ignore what they were seeing. The conversation no longer felt like a warning. It felt like an attempt to shape a conclusion before they had the opportunity to form one for themselves. And listen to this. As that realization settled in, a wave of disappointment began washing over them. Not disappointment in you. Disappointment in the fact that they had almost allowed someone else's perspective to outweigh their own experiences. They thought about all the moments they had shared with you. They thought about all the evidence they had personally witnessed. And they realized how close they came to doubting those experiences because of a conversation that wasn't built on the full truth. The situation was becoming clearer with every passing day. Your soulmate started recognizing that the person influencing them may have been acting from their own fears, insecurities, misunderstandings, or personal biases. Perhaps they genuinely believed what they were saying. Perhaps they were repeating information they never fully examined themselves, or perhaps they had their own reasons for wanting distance between you and your soulmate. Whatever the reason, one thing became obvious. The story they received was incomplete, and your heart needs this right now, because that realization gave your soulmate something powerful, confidence in their own judgment. For a while, they had been caught between two voices. One voice came from outside influences. The other voice came from their own experiences. Now, for the first time, they knew which voice deserved their trust. They understood that no one else had lived their experiences. No one else had seen what they had seen. No one else could decide what those experiences meant. As this understanding grew stronger, so did their certainty. The confusion that once filled their mind started disappearing. The doubts that once felt overwhelming began losing their influence. In their place came clarity. Real clarity. The kind that comes when a person stops relying on assumptions and starts relying on truth. And listen to this. What affected them most was realizing that this entire situation had unintentionally revealed something valuable. It showed them how important it is to think independently. It showed them how dangerous it can be to accept a story without examining it. And most importantly, it showed them that your character was far stronger than the accusations made against it. By now, your soulmate was no longer questioning whether they should believe what they heard. That question had already been answered. Instead, they were beginning to understand something much deeper. The attempt to turn them against you had failed. In fact, it had produced the exact opposite result. Because while investigating the situation, they had started seeing qualities in you that they had never fully appreciated before. And those discoveries were about to change everything they thought they knew about you. And listen to this carefully, because what your soulmate discovered during this journey changed their perspective in a way they never expected. What began as an attempt to verify information had turned into something completely different. Instead of finding reasons to doubt you, they found themselves noticing qualities they had previously overlooked. Instead of uncovering flaws, they kept uncovering evidence of your character. And your heart needs this right now, because sometimes the greatest truths about a person are revealed when they are being misunderstood. The more your soulmate reflected on everything, the more they realized something remarkable. Throughout this entire situation, you never seemed focused on defending yourself. You never appeared obsessed with proving people wrong. You never spent your energy trying to control what others thought about you. Instead, you continued being yourself. You continued living according to your values. You continued allowing your actions to speak for themselves. And listen to this. That quiet confidence began making a powerful impression on them. At first, they didn't fully understand why it affected them so deeply. But the more they thought about it, the clearer it became. Many people react strongly when faced with criticism or misunderstanding. Many people become consumed by the need to explain themselves. Yet every memory they had of you suggested something different. Again and again, they remembered examples of consistency, examples of patience, examples of strength that didn't require attention or validation from others. Those memories carried more weight now than ever before. As they revisited old interactions, they started noticing patterns they had missed before. They remembered moments when your words matched your actions. They remembered times when you remained true to yourself, even when it would have been easier to take a different path. They remembered situations where you showed kindness despite receiving little in return. And your heart needs this right now, because those observations were creating a completely new understanding inside them. The attempt to damage your image had unintentionally forced your soulmate to look at you more carefully than ever before. And the closer they looked, the stronger their respect became. Every question they asked seemed to lead to another reason to appreciate your character. Every doubt they examined seemed to reveal another example of your authenticity. What was supposed to create distance was actually creating understanding. And listen to this. One realization stood out above all the others. They began understanding that true character is often revealed during difficult moments. Anyone can appear impressive when circumstances are easy. Anyone can seem admirable when life is going smoothly. But genuine character reveals itself when misunderstandings arise, when challenges appear, and when pressure increases. The more they reflected on how you handled difficult situations, the more they admired what they saw. Your soulmate also began recognizing something else. The accusations they heard were based on words. Their growing respect for you was based on experience, and the difference between those two things felt enormous. Words can be manipulated, stories can be distorted, opinions can change, but direct experience carries a different kind of truth. The more they trusted their own observations, the more confident they became in what they were learning about you. And your heart needs this right now, because this process was doing more than changing their opinion. It was transforming the way they viewed the entire situation. What once seemed like an attack against your reputation was becoming an unexpected lesson. A lesson about integrity, a lesson about perception, a lesson about how easy it is to misunderstand someone when you only listen to other people's narratives. The deeper they looked, the more obvious it became that your strengths were shining through the very situation that was supposed to hide them. Your patience became more visible. Your resilience became more visible. Your consistency became more visible. The qualities that truly define you were impossible to ignore once they started paying attention. And listen to this carefully. By now, your soulmate had reached a place they never expected to reach when this story began. They were no longer focused on the negative things they had heard. Those concerns had lost their power. Instead, they were focused on what they had personally discovered. They were focused on the truth revealed through observation, reflection, and experience. And as this understanding settled into their heart, they found themselves facing a decision that would change everything moving forward. Because they now understood that the attempt to turn them against you had failed completely. In fact, it had accomplished the exact opposite. It had shown them your true character more clearly than ever before. And what they decided to do with that realization would strengthen this connection in ways nobody could have predicted. And listen to this carefully, because this is where everything finally came together for your soulmate. After all the questions, after all the doubts, after all the time spent trying to separate truth from opinion, they reached a realization that changed the way they viewed this entire situation. What started as an attempt to turn them against you had become the very reason they understood you more clearly than ever before. And your heart needs this right now, because sometimes the obstacles placed between two people end up revealing truths that would have remained hidden otherwise. Looking back, your soulmate realized how easily things could have gone differently. They could have accepted the negative information without question. They could have allowed someone else's perspective to become their own. They could have walked away before seeking the truth for themselves. But instead they chose to investigate. They chose to reflect. They chose to trust their experiences rather than blindly trust someone else's interpretation. And listen to this. That decision became one of the most important decisions they could have made, because it allowed them to discover something far more valuable than the truth about a rumor. It allowed them to discover the truth about you. The more they reflected on everything they had learned, the more grateful they became that they had not rushed to judgment. They realized that assumptions can create distance where understanding should exist. They realized that stories often change when passed from one person to another. Most importantly, they realized that real character cannot be understood through gossip, speculation, or second-hand opinions. Real character reveals itself through consistent actions over time. And every experience they had with you pointed toward the same conclusion. And your heart needs this right now, because your soulmate was beginning to see this entire situation as a blessing in disguise. At first, it seemed like a problem. It seemed like something designed to create confusion and separation. But now they understood that it had actually strengthened their ability to see clearly. The attempt to manipulate their perspective had forced them to pay closer attention than ever before. It had encouraged them to examine details they might have otherwise overlooked. It had pushed them to trust their own judgment instead of relying on outside influences. And listen to this. The result was something nobody expected. Instead of creating distance, the situation created trust. Instead of creating doubt, it created certainty. Instead of weakening their perception of you, it deepened their respect. Every step of the journey had revealed another layer of understanding. Every challenge had brought another realization. Every question had ultimately led them closer to the truth. As these realizations settled into their heart, they understood something powerful. The person who tried to influence them may have believed they were controlling the outcome. They may have believed they were shaping the future of this connection. But the opposite happened. The more pressure they applied, the more your soulmate looked for answers. The more answers they found, the stronger their confidence became. The stronger their confidence became, the less influence those negative words had over them. Your soulmate also learned something important about themselves during this experience. They learned the value of independent thinking. They learn the importance of trusting what they personally witness. They learn that fear and doubt often disappear when examined honestly. And your heart needs this right now, because those lessons will remain with them long after this situation is forgotten. The experience changed them. It made them more aware, more thoughtful, more willing to seek truth rather than accept assumptions. And listen to this carefully. The greatest irony of all is that the person who tried to create division accidentally created clarity. The person who hoped to weaken the connection ended up strengthening it. The person who wanted your soulmate to focus on your flaws unintentionally revealed your strengths. What was meant to become a barrier became a bridge. What was meant to create separation became a source of understanding. Now, when your soulmate thinks about everything that happened, they no longer focus on the negativity that started it all. They focus on what they discovered because of it. They focus on the truth that emerged when everything else fell away. They focus on the character, integrity, and consistency they found when they looked beyond the noise. And because of that, they are no longer standing in a place of uncertainty. They are standing in a place of clarity. Because sometimes the people who try the hardest to separate two paths unknowingly become the reason those paths grow stronger. Sometimes attempts at manipulation reveal truth. Sometimes doubt creates understanding. And sometimes the very thing that was meant to turn someone away becomes the reason they finally see another person for who they truly are. That is what happened here. And that realization has changed everything moving forward.